The hum of fluorescent lights barely covered the static tension crawling through the Senate hearing room. Reporters, legal clerks, and aides sat on the edges of their seats, their pens poised, their eyes fixed on the dais. Cameras rolled silently. Transmitting the scene lived to millions across the country. This wasn't a trial, not officially, but to those watching, it might as well have been. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She sat still at the center of the panel, posture. Eyes straight, eyes steady. A sealed manila envelope rested in front of her, its corners worn from days of quiet handling. Her hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. She'd done that in private when no one was looking. Now, every camera, every lens, every eye in the chamber watched her. And across the long wooden table, seated behind the witness mic, was the man who had shaped decades of American jurisprudence, Justice Clarence Thomas, his face impassive, his fingers clasped together, his gaze heavy but unreadable. He didn't look at the envelope. He looked at Jasmine. Not with contempt, but something colder, dismissal. He had sat on the highest bench in the land longer than Jasmine had been in politics. He had survived accusations, survived confirmation, survived shifts in cultural winds and calls for accountability. He had become a symbol, for some, a titan, for others, a warning, but today, something felt different. Justice Thomas, the chairman's voice cracked through the silence like a gavel. This hearing will examine ongoing questions about judicial ethics, including potential conflicts of interest and financial disclosure. Practices, you will be under oath. Thomas nodded once, the motion tight. Understood. Jasmine leaned forward, pressing the red button on her mic. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Almost too calm. Before we begin, she said, I'd like to enter a sealed document into the hearing record. This envelope contains evidence that, if verified, speaks to matters directly tied to the questions before us. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Thomas's brow twitched. It was the first crack, Congresswoman, his leer interjected. We were not made aware of any new submissions. This is out of order, the chairman cut in sharply. The Congresswoman may submit evidence under seal. The committee will review its admissibility. The envelope was passed forward. Jasmine didn't take her eyes off Thomas. She remembered the first time she heard the tape. The way his voice measured, intelligent, casual, spoke things that had never been meant for public ears. She remembered the cold in her spine. The sense that she wasn't just listening to a man's words, but the soul of an institution cracking open. She remembered asking herself, if this is true, what isn't? Thomas, for his part, remained still. But his eyes, yes, there it was, narrowed just slightly, as if trying to remember what he had forgotten. Jasmine had prepared for this moment for weeks, years in some ways, not out of vengeance, not for spectacle, but because the lie had become too heavy for the truth to keep carrying. The chairman continued reading from the agenda, but no one was listening. The envelope sat on the table now, between them. Just paper, plastic, and magnetic tape. And yet it pulsed with the weight of reckoning. Outside, America watched, mostly unaware that within that folder lay a voice from 1999 that could shake the very pillars of the Republic. Jasmine finally spoke again, her tone steady, her words deliberate. I'm not here to destroy anyone, she said. But I believe the public has a right to hear the truth, even if that truth has been hiding behind robes for far too long. Thomas didn't respond, but Jasmine saw it, the flicker in his eyes. He knew, and for the first time in decades. Maybe, just maybe, he was afraid. The dim glow of the office's antique desk lamp barely cut through the evening haze. Jasmine Crockett sat across from Moloch, her trusted chief of staff, in a room thick with tension and unspoken questions. A sealed envelope from the hearing sat between them, but what truly mattered was the recording inside, the 1999 audio. That could dismantle a legacy. Moloch rubbed his temples. Jasmine, this tape, it's explosive, but the chain of custody is fragile. If the defense tears it apart, all this could be dismissed as hearsay or tampered evidence. Jasmine nodded slowly. I know, that's why we need every angle covered, every witness, every document that ties it to the source. She remembered the retired court clerk who had found the tape. an unassuming woman named Eleanor Pierce, once a quiet guardian of court archives, who had come forward after decades of silence. Eleanor's fear of retaliation had kept her silent until now, but when she heard Jasmine's call for truth, something inside her stirred. She handed over a battered cassette labeled in faint, almost illegible script. CT Retreat 1999, Malik frowned. Why did it take so long for this to surface? And why now? Because the system buries inconvenient truths, Jasmine said, voice barely above a whisper. People who know the truth are scared or complicit? Eleanor risked everything. We owe her the safest path. Malik's phone buzzed with incoming messages, a media leak, lawyers strategizing, political insiders. Warning of fallout. The stakes were already climbing higher. Jasmine's thoughts raced beyond the legal battles. This tape didn't just implicate Clarence Thomas. It exposed a culture where power and money dictated justice behind closed doors. If public trust shattered, what would rise from the ashes? Could the institution survive? She pressed her fingers together and looked up. Malik, I'm ready. We can't hide behind silence anymore. Outside, the city hummed with indifferent life. But Jasmine knew, when the recording aired, the world would never be the same. The weight of that truth was a burden she was willing to bear, no matter the cost. The morning sun filtered coldly through the towering windows of the Capitol as Jasmine Crockett entered the Judiciary Committee's chambers. The air was thick, with the hum of whispered conversations, hurried glances, and the undercurrent of old alliances quietly shifting. Around the room sat familiar faces, senators, aides, and legal advisors, each wearing the mask of civility but hiding ambitions and loyalties just beneath the surface. Across the aisle, Justice Clarence Thomas appeared, a figure carved from stone, an immovable monolith shaped by decades of power. His steely eyes scanned the room, surveying the scene with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tensions simmered. His aides whispered urgently, and his lawyer's fingers drummed nervously on the polished wood. Jasmine found her seat, steadying herself against the undercurrent of silent scrutiny. She knew that this hearing was more than a legal proceeding. It was a battle for the soul of the institution itself. Her opening remarks were measured, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. This was a reckoning long overdue. She began outlining the troubling patterns: undisclosed corporate gifts, backdoor dinners with lobbyists, judicial decisions that oddly aligned with wealthy benefactors. Her words struck like ripples in a still pond, spreading unease and forcing senators to shift in their chairs. Some exchanged guarded glances. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Thomas remained silent but unyielding, his reputation a shield against the mounting accusations. Yet Jasmine saw cracks in the armor, a flicker of irritation, a tightening jaw when she referenced specific cases, where influence seemed to have corrupted impartiality. Whispers echoed in the cloakrooms and hallways, as political advisors scrambled to manage the fallout. Party lines began to blur. Elias warned Jasmine in hushed tones, push too hard, and you risk fracturing the fragile unity of the court and Congress alike. But Jasmine's resolve only hardened. The veil of power protects many secrets, she declared before the committee. But it cannot shield the truth forever. The chamber, tense and silent, hung on her words. Across the city, news outlets prepared their headlines, sensing a storm brewing that would shake Washington to its core. Behind the composed facade of governance, the gears of political maneuvering began to grind, and Jasmine stood at the center of it all, ready to expose the truth no matter where it led. The morning sun filtered coldly through the towering windows of the Capitol as Jasmine Crockett entered the Judiciary Committee's chambers. The air was thick with the hum of whispered conversations, hurried glances, and the undercurrent of old alliances quietly shifting. Around the room sat familiar faces, senators, aides, and legal advisors, each wearing the mask of civility but hiding ambitions and loyalties just beneath the surface. Across the aisle, Justice Clarence Thomas appeared, a figure carved from stone, an immovable monolith shaped by decades of power. His steely eyes scanned the room, surveying the scene with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tensions simmered. His aides whispered urgently, and his lawyer's fingers drummed nervously on the polished wood. Jasmine found her seat, steadying herself against the undercurrent of silent scrutiny. She knew that this hearing was more than a legal proceeding. It was a battle for the soul of the institution itself. Her opening remarks were measured, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. This was a reckoning long overdue. She began outlining the troubling patterns: undisclosed corporate gifts, backdoor dinners with lobbyists, judicial decisions that oddly aligned with wealthy benefactors. Her words struck like ripples in a still pond, spreading unease and forcing senators to shift in their chairs. Some exchanged guarded glances. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Thomas remained silent but unyielding, his reputation a shield against the mounting accusations. Yet Jasmine saw cracks in the armor, a flicker of irritation, a tightening jaw when she referenced specific cases where influence seemed to have corrupted impartiality. Whispers echoed in the cloakrooms and hallways as political advisors scrambled to manage the fallout. Party lines began to blur. Allies warned Jasmine in hushed tones, "Push too hard, and you risk fracturing the fragile unity of the court and Congress alike." But Jasmine's resolve only hardened. "The veil of power protects many secrets," she declared before the committee, "but it cannot shield the truth forever." The chamber, tense and silent, hung on her words. Across the city, news outlets prepared their headlines, sensing a storm brewing that would shake Washington to its core. Behind the composed facade of governance, the gears of political maneuvering began to grind, and Jasmine stood at the center of it all, ready to expose the truth no matter where it led. The morning sun filtered coldly through the towering windows of the Capitol as Jasmine Crockett entered the Judiciary Committee's chambers. The air was thick with the hum of whispered conversations, hurried glances, and the undercurrent of old alliances quietly shifting. Around the room sat familiar faces: senators, aides, and legal advisors, each wearing the mask of civility but hiding ambitions and loyalties just beneath the surface. Across the aisle, Justice Clarence Thomas appeared, a figure carved from stone, an immovable monolith shaped by decades of power. His steely eyes scanned the room, surveying the scene with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tensions simmered. His aides whispered urgently, and his lawyer's fingers drummed nervously on the polished wood. Jasmine found her seat, steadying herself against the undercurrent of silent scrutiny. She knew that this hearing was more than a legal proceeding. It was a battle for the soul of the institution itself. Her opening remarks were measured, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. This was a reckoning long overdue. She began outlining the troubling patterns: undisclosed corporate gifts, backdoor dinners with lobbyists, judicial decisions that oddly aligned with wealthy benefactors. Her words struck like ripples in a still pond, spreading unease and forcing senators to shift in their chairs. Some exchanged guarded glances. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Thomas remained silent but unyielding, his reputation a shield against the mounting accusations. Yet Jasmine saw cracks in the armor, a flicker of irritation, a tightening jaw when she referenced specific cases where influence seemed to have corrupted impartiality. Whispers echoed in the cloakrooms and hallways as political advisors scrambled to manage the fallout. Party lines began to blur. Allies warned Jasmine in hushed tones, "Push too hard, and you risk fracturing the fragile unity of the court and Congress alike." But Jasmine's resolve only hardened. "The veil of power protects many secrets," she declared before the committee, "but it cannot shield the truth forever." The chamber, tense and silent, hung on her words. Across the city, news outlets prepared their headlines, sensing a storm brewing that would shake Washington to its core. Behind the composed facade of governance, the gears of political maneuvering began to grind, and Jasmine stood at the center of it all, ready to expose the truth no matter where it led. Just after dawn, a bombshell headline exploded across digital screens and newsstands nationwide. "Thomas implicated in secret tapes? A nation on edge." The story was incomplete, a whisper of accusation without substance, but the damage was immediate. Social media ignited with speculation, pundits spun theories, and late-night talk shows buzzed with anticipation inside Jasmine Crockett's war room. The atmosphere was electric but fraught. Her communications director scrambled to contain the narrative. "The recording hasn't been released yet," she reminded the team, "but now the media circus is out of control. This could backfire if we don't handle it carefully." Jasmine remained calm, her gaze fixed on the growing storm outside the office windows. The leak was intentional, or someone wanted the world to know there was more beneath the surface. But now, opponents would claim political theater, accusing her of weaponizing a decades-old recording for personal gain. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was a conservative senator, his voice low but sharp. "Congresswoman Crockett, I'm advising you to reconsider your next move. This isn't just politics, it's a powder keg. Open that file, and you open the gates of hell. You think you're ready for what comes next?" Jasmine exhaled slowly, the weight of her decision pressing down. "I've never been more ready," she replied steadily. "If the truth burns, then let it rain fire. The people deserve to know." Outside the Capitol, a crowd gathered. Protesters, supporters, and curious onlookers murmured, their faces lit by flashing cameras and the glow of smartphones. The delicate dance of power had turned into a blaze, and the country braced for the reckoning that was no longer a distant threat, but an inevitable storm gathering. On the horizon, the atmosphere inside the marble halls of the Supreme Court was taut with quiet urgency. Justice Clarence Thomas convened with his legal team in a stately conference room, the air thick with a mixture of defiance and desperation. Around the polished table sat a cadre of Washington's most formidable minds, former Solicitor Generals, constitutional scholars, and media strategists, each handpicked to protect the legacy of a man whose name had become synonymous with judicial power. Thomas listened as his lead attorney laid out the strategy: discredit the recording, cast doubt on its authenticity, and attack Jasmine Crockett's motives. "This is not just a legal battle," the attorney emphasized. "It's a war for public opinion. We must frame this as a political witch hunt, a cynical ploy to undermine the integrity of the court." Thomas nodded, his expression hardening. "The dignity of the bench must be preserved at all costs," he said, voice low but resolute. "If that means weathering a storm of lies and innuendo, so be it." Meanwhile, media consultants mapped out a counteroffensive. Headlines would shift focus from the substance of the tape to the character of the accuser. They would remind the public of Thomas's decades of service, his rise from humble beginnings, and his steadfast commitment to the Constitution. Back in her office, Jasmine watched a live stream of Thomas's private speech at an exclusive donor dinner. His words were carefully crafted, powerful, almost poetic, pledging to defend the judiciary against what he called a corrosive tide of misinformation. But Jasmine caught the subtle cracks beneath the surface, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a hesitation in his voice. She leaned forward, whispering to herself, "Even the strongest walls have cracks, and I'm here to find them." The stage was set. The courtroom battle would be fought, not only with evidence but with narrative, with public perception as a weapon. Each side armed to the teeth, ready to wage a war far beyond the legal text, one that would shake the foundations of American democracy itself. The grand hallways of the Capitol were cloaked in whispered warnings and veiled threats. Jasmine Crockett found herself summoned to an unscheduled ethics meeting, the kind of gathering where smiles masked steel traps and alliances shifted like shadows. The room was filled with senior members of her own party stalwarts who had weathered countless political storms but now looked at her with a mixture of concern and caution. "Congresswoman," began a graying senator whose voice held the weight of years spent navigating Washington's delicate balance, "you must understand that some battles come with a cost. You're stirring a hornet's nest. We're all trying to keep the fragile unity intact." Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. Unity built on silence isn't unity at all. If we don't confront the rot, it will consume everything. The senator sighed, shaking his head. "There are things the public isn't ready to face. You risk fracturing the court, dividing the country. But what if what we're standing on was never solid ground to begin with?" Jasmine pressed. If the foundation is rotten, how long before the whole structure collapses? Later, alone in her office, the weight of their words pressed down on her. Doubts flickered. Was she pushing too far? Would the country fracture beyond repair? Would truth, once revealed, be a healing light or a weapon of destruction? Her fingers hovered over a small playback device resting on her desk. Inside it was the recording Justice Thomas's voice from 1999, calm and revealing, a stark contrast to the public persona he maintained. Her hand trembled ever so slightly before she pressed play, the room filled with the unmistakable cadence of a man unaware of being recorded, speaking freely about decisions shaped by power and money. The cold reality settled over her. This was not just politics. This was a reckoning, and it had already begun. The hearing room was hushed, shadows lengthening as afternoon light spilled through the tall windows. Jasmine Crockett stood alone at the podium, her fingers steady on the microphone, eyes scanning the packed chamber. Cameras, senators, aides, reporters, all waiting for the moment she would break the silence. For weeks, the recording had been a whispered threat, a shadow lurking beneath the surface of the proceedings. Now the time had come to let it speak. She pressed play on the small digital player, and the room dimmed as the speakers filled with the unmistakable voice of a younger Clarence Thomas, candid and unguarded, captured during a private retreat 2 decades earlier. His words cut through the stillness. Strategic rulings tied explicitly to donor influence. References to verdicts that seemed less about justice and more about balance sheets and political capital. The tone was calm, measured, but the implications were incendiary. You don't get outcomes without input. Money is input, Thomas said plainly, almost as if stating a fact everyone already knew but dared not say aloud. Gasps rippled through the audience. Senators shifted uneasily, some looking down at their notes, others exchanging incredulous glances. Reporters scribbled furiously. The tape played on, revealing calculated maneuvers, quid pro quos dressed in the language of jurisprudence. Jasmine's voice broke the silence as the tape ended. What you have just heard is not conjecture, not rumor, it is the voice of the man sworn to uphold justice. This is the truth the public deserves. A stillness fell, weighty and charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Somewhere in the room, a cell phone clicked, silent but monumental. Outside, news alerts began flooding in. The stage was no longer set. It was a blaze. And in that charged moment, Jasmine understood this was more than evidence. It was a trigger, a spark that would ignite the fight for the soul of the nation. The morning of the first public hearing arrived like a storm breaking over the Capitol. Outside the imposing courthouse, crowds swelled, protesters clutching signs, supporters waving flags, and a sea of reporters jostling for position. The air was electric with anticipation and anxiety, a nation watching through screens as history prepared to unfold. Inside the chamber, the Judiciary Committee convened. The wooden benches gleamed under harsh lights, the judges' seats looming in the background as a silent reminder of the gravity of the moment. Jasmine Crockett took her place at the podium, her posture unyielding, her voice steady despite the roaring pressure. Justice Clarence Thomas sat across, flanked by his legal team, his expression guarded yet unshaken. The chairperson called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of the gavel. This session will examine evidence regarding potential breaches of judicial ethics. Congresswoman Crockett, you may begin. Jasmine's opening was precise and unrelenting. She methodically presented inconsistencies in Thomas's prior testimonies, laying out a timeline of undisclosed meetings, financial ties, and the now infamous 1999 recording. Every point was backed by meticulous research, every question designed to cut through layers of political protection. Thomas's defense team objected, repeatedly trying to derail the flow with procedural delays and accusations of partisanship. But the chairperson overruled, maintaining order and pushing the hearing forward. Jasmine's voice rose as she addressed the room and the cameras beyond. We have evidence that challenges the very foundation of judicial impartiality. This isn't about politics, it's about the rule of law. The American people deserve transparency, accountability, and above all, justice. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like a verdict in the air. Outside, millions watched, their breaths held as the first gavel fell, signaling the beginning of a battle that would test the limits of power, truth, and democracy itself. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened with tension as the legal battle escalated beyond public hearings into the intricate world of motions, objections, and constitutional maneuvering. Justice Clarence Thomas's legal team, wielding experience forged in the highest courts, unleashed a flurry of challenges aimed at silencing the damning recording. Their lead attorney rose with measured calm, arguing that the tape's chain of custody was compromised, improperly stored, susceptible to tampering, and that its very existence violated privacy protections. Admitting this evidence, he contended, would set a dangerous precedent undermining the sanctity of private communication and judicial confidentiality. Across the courtroom, Jasmine's counsel countered with airtight documentation, tracing the recording's path from the retired court clerk to the hearing room. Every link meticulously verified, every witness prepared to testify. Transparency is not a threat to justice. It is justice itself, her attorney declared, eyes blazing with conviction. Legal experts outside the court dissected every argument, in live panels and op-eds, fueling a nationwide debate that blurred the line between law and politics. Talk shows buzzed with constitutional scholars and former judges dissecting the implications, while ordinary citizens grappled with a simple, haunting question: if the highest justice could be bought and sold, what hope remained? Finally, a federal judge issued a landmark ruling. The recording was admissible evidence. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and subdued murmurs. Jasmine allowed herself a brief, controlled smile. Across the aisle, Thomas blinked once, then twice, a subtle but unmistakable crack in the facade of uncheckable stoicism. His defense team regrouped swiftly, but the tide had shifted. The evidence was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was a blaring call for accountability that neither law nor power could easily mute. In that charged silence, the courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath, bracing for the confrontation. That was now inevitable. The courtroom grew hushed. The heavy oak doors closed like the seal on a coffin. A single speaker was positioned at the center, its voice about to carry words that would reverberate far beyond the chamber's walls. Senators, lawyers, journalists all leaned forward as the room darkened, the afternoon light dimming under drawn curtains. Jasmine stood steady, the faint glow from her tablet casting sharp angles on her determined face. The digital player clicked, and Justice Clarence Thomas's voice filled the room, clear and unfiltered. The recording revealed a chilling candidness. Thomas speaking with cold calculation about judicial decisions steered by corporate funding, each verdict weighed like a transaction, each ruling a currency of influence. The phrase that seized the room came slowly but struck like a hammer. You don't get outcomes without input. Money is input. Gasps echoed softly, and a few senators exchanged shocked looks. Reporters jotted furiously, capturing the words that would soon headline every news cycle. The recording unfolded further, threading a narrative of power intertwined with wealth, ethics sacrificed beneath layers of silence. When the tape ended, the courtroom was swallowed in an electric silence. Jasmine broke it, voice firm and unwavering. This is not conjecture, this is not a smear. This is the voice of a man sworn to uphold justice, speaking plainly about the system he serves. The weight of those words settled over the chamber like a verdict. The public watching live sensed the gravity of the moment. The scales of justice now visibly tipped, their balance shattered. In that charged stillness, a lone cell phone clicked, a sound tiny but monumental, capturing history as it unfolded. The line between law and truth blurred irreversibly, and the nation held its breath, waiting for the fallout that was certain to come. Under the harsh courtroom lights, Justice Clarence Thomas took the stand, the air thick with anticipation and barely concealed hostility. His usual stoicism was a fortress, but today cracks appeared subtle, almost imperceptible hesitations betraying the weight of the moment. The nation watched, their eyes fixed on a man whose silence had long been as powerful as his rulings. Jasmine. Crockett rose slowly, her voice calm yet charged with purpose. Justice Thomas, you have heard the recording played before this committee. You described it as hypothetical. Can you explain which parts were not factual? Thomas's gaze sharpened, the courtroom tightening around his words like a vice. The statements were taken out of context. I was discussing theoretical scenarios, not actual judicial decisions. But were the rulings themselves hypothetical as well? Jasmine pressed, her tone unyielding. Thomas's composure wavered for a brief moment. No, but the circumstances were complex. Jasmine seized the opening. She quoted directly from the recording, each phrase a precise scalpel. You said, "You don't get outcomes without input. Money is input. That is your voice. Justice, not a ghost, not a smear." Do you deny the implications? A charged silence fell. Even the most loyal allies shifted uncomfortably. Thomas's reply was measured but strained. Implications do not equate to proof. The room crackled with tension, a battle waged not only in legal arguments but in moral conviction. Jasmine's challenge was more than a cross-examination. It was a philosophical indictment of a system where power and money blurred the lines of justice. Outside, public opinion swayed wildly. Some saw a titan defending his honor. Others witnessed the unraveling of a myth. The courtroom was a crucible forging the future of justice under the heat of relentless scrutiny. And Jasmine, steady and resolute, stood at its center, unafraid to stare down the very institution she sought to reform. As the courtroom battles raged, the nation outside became a tumult of voices, a fragmented chorus wrestling with the revelations. The story was no longer confined to legal briefs or committee rooms. It had spilled into homes, coffee shops, classrooms, and social media feeds. People from every corner of America grappled with the seismic implications. In predominantly black neighborhoods, elders debated quietly, their faces etched with a mixture of pride and painful disillusionment. Clarence Thomas was a symbol one, forged by years of overcoming systemic barriers. Now, those symbols felt fragile, even fractured. Across college campuses, young activists rallied, their voices rising in protest demanding accountability and reform. Hashtags trend.